Welcome into my studio. You can consider class officially in session. But don't worry, this is the cozy, casual kind of class. I'm Meg, I'm an interior designer and visual media specialist. Today, I wanna walk you through my ABCs of rendering for real people, so you can get started without feeling stupid. This is basically a cheat sheet of everything that you need to know when it comes to rendering for interior design, all just packed into one place. I also offer this guide in PDF format, which I will make sure to link below in the description if you like to have a visual handy as well. Just think of this as sitting down and having coffee with me, just having a little chit chat, except we've got like a little bit of structure to it, but don't worry, it'll be easy to follow. So grab your coffee, grab your notebook, get comfy, and let's go ahead and start with A. We're gonna have to roll in the whiteboard for A because A is for aspect ratio, which is essentially just the size of your image. And I think this is a good way to explain it. So typically an aspect ratio will show up as 16, 9, 1, 1. So these are essentially just two different measurements. So for this one, the 16 would be the width, because that's the longer one, and this side would be the 9. So it's saying for 16 to 9 ratio. Now, if you were to flip this like an iPhone, now our aspect ratio is going to be 9 to 16. Aspect ratio is extremely important when it comes to composition, which we're going to be talking about here in a second. This is almost always the first question that I ask a client, or the first question I even ask myself, and I'm trying to think about how eventually is this image going to be seen, and what is the best aspect ratio that I can use for it. In the PDF guide that I've linked below, you'll see a couple of typical aspect ratios that you can kind of use as a cheat sheet. B is for bloom. Now, you might have heard of this word before, but basically this is just the glow effect that takes place around any lights in your rendering. So it could be sunlight coming through a window, or it could be can lights. On the screen right now while you're watching this, there's probably a bloom around this sign right here because it's emitting light, and the way that my camera is interpreting it, it's giving it a little bit of glow. So it doesn't have just like hard edges. This makes your rendering feel a little bit more natural and less harsh. Now you gotta be careful though, because too much bloom can definitely ruin your rendering and make it feel too like hazy and glowy. But on the other hand, no bloom at all can make your rendering feel like too crisp and unrealistic. C is for something I am most passionate about, and that is composition. I truly think that every good render starts with good composition. It can legitimately make or break your visuals. Composition is essentially how you arrange everything in the aspect ratio that you choose. It doesn't matter how good the design is, how well it's lit. If your camera angle is off, that is going to be the first thing that someone notices. So here's just a few tips when you're thinking through your composition. Unless you're going for like a super dramatic head-on shot, try placing the camera in a corner, and that will give you a little bit more dynamic view. I also try to be mindful of my 3x3 grid. You can actually turn this on in a lot of rendering programs just to kind of guide you, but I'll use that 3x3 grid to make sure I don't have any vertical lines dead center in the image. I also usually like to pick a focal point. So think of this like if you have your camera and you have your camera target, you want your target on the focal point, but ideally that focal point will not land directly dead center in the image. It should be a little bit off skew. As for camera height, I always try to shoot for like 4 feet. I know that sounds like it's like from a kid's perspective. Just trust me on this one. It gives the viewer a little bit more of an immersive experience. D is for depth of field. Now this is the like subtle blur that you will see sometimes in photos. Like if the photo is focusing on an object, the background will look a little bit blurry, or vice versa. Maybe the object in the foreground is blurry and the background is crisp. That is your depth of field. This can give your rendering a very cinematic feel. I personally like to use this very sparingly though, and typically only for detail shots that are highlighting something specific. The camera setting that controls your depth of field is called your f-stop. A low f-stop is going to give you a blurrier background. A high f-stop is going to make it a little bit more sharp everywhere. For interiors, I usually recommend sticking around an f-stop of 4 to 6 to get just enough of that depth without it looking flat. E is for exposure. This is simply how bright or dark your image is. When you take a photo and the sky is blasted out, that's an overexposed photo. That means that the camera is seeing way too much light, and that's actually really hard to get back in post-production because usually those whites are going to be blasted out and it's just going to crush those pixels. But if your rendering is too dark, then some of the details do get lost. Exposure is adjusted with a camera setting called ISO. If your ISO is higher, you're going to have a brighter image. If it's lower, you'll have a darker image. But just a quick tip that I have learned after lots of trial and error and failure, get the numbers of your light sources adjusted first before messing with the ISO settings. So get your sun in, get your lights in, make sure that they're lighting the room right, and then later you can adjust your ISO if you need to kind of brighten it up or darken it down a little bit. Otherwise, they just end up competing against each other. You're going to be adjusting your ISO, you're going to be adjusting your light numbers, and they're just going to be going back and forth, and you'll just be wasting time. We don't have time for that. F is for field of view. You'll also see this as FOV, and this essentially just controls how wide or narrow your camera lens is. So if you have a really wide field of view, maybe you have like a 90-degree field of view angle, your image is going to look way too distorted. It's going to look like you're like in a circus or something. However, if your field of view is too narrow, like 20, 30 degrees, especially in an interior, you're going to feel super cramped. I like to shoot for like 50 to 65 degrees on my interior shots because that way you can get just enough of the image image without it feeling too distorted. G is for groups. If you've ever tried using any sort of 3D modeling software, heck, even if you've used like Canva, you know that groups are pretty important. They help keep your model or your image or whatever file you're working in clean, editable, and fast. Now, in certain software like in SketchUp, you might benefit from making your groups into components, which are essentially instances. If you have like a window that's repeating 100 times throughout your design, the file is not going to look at 100 different groups. It will look at one of the components, and then like when you edit that one, it will update all the others. So not only is that easy for you, but it also optimizes your file because the file is only looking at that one window instead of 100. It's kind of magical, actually. There are plenty of other ways to stay organized in your 3D modeling software as well. I always deep dive into this into my courses. I'll make sure that I will provide a link down in the description if you want to check those out. H is for HDRI, also known sometimes as just an HDR. It stands for High Dynamic Range Image. Basically, it's just a fancy 360-degree background, but it's not just like an image plate of your background. It also gives you light for your rendering based on the image. So the lighting source actually matches what you're seeing in the background. In the interior world, I would say that HDRs are usually just used as a backplate. There are tons of free resources online where you can download HDRs. Those are linked in the PDF guide. I is for imperfections, specifically material imperfections. These are basically just little flaws that you add to the materials to give them that extra realistic oomph, like scratches on metal, fingerprints on glass, or roughness on wood. Perfectly smooth surfaces tend to look fake, and our goal is to be as realistic as possible. So adding in these little subtle imperfections can give your render some real depth. Even just like a hint of reflection on a material that doesn't necessarily need to be reflective can give it so much more depth. And I'm not just gonna tell you what an imperfection is, I'm gonna tell you how you can add imperfections. For one, inside your material map, you can add scratches or any sort of imperfections just with a roughness map. Now, aside from materials, you can also add imperfections geometrically. If you have a couple different chairs of the same type, just like rotate one or two of them. Maybe misalign a rug just a little bit, or even adjust different plant heights. Just think about how things would actually look in real life. They're not gonna look perfect. Lastly, another really good way to add imperfections is just by utilizing the power of AI. There are plenty of tools online that will just help add a little bit of like variation to different materials, or even tools like Enscape's AI that can add some like crispness to vegetation and people's faces. Again, to just give them like that little bit of like imperfection so they don't look like a 3D model. J is for JPEG. What other words in the rendering world start with J? I don't know. A JPEG is just a compressed file. It's a file format in which you save your rendering. Usually JPEGs are best for the web, emails, sharing. Because they are compressed, their file size is smaller. PNGs are great for mood boards, overlays, presentations, but your file size will be a little bit bigger. There is a full cheat sheet of file types in the PDF guide as well. K is for keyframes. So let's just switch gears to animations for a second, which is a huge part of visualization for a lot of us. Keyframes are basically just markers inside the animation that define different start and end points of a motion. I know that not everyone watching this does animations, but just a few tips because you probably are gonna end up doing some sort of animation, maybe for your social media or something, even if it's not for a client. These are a few things I want you to keep in mind if and when you ever have to do an animation. Move your camera way slower than you think. I'm talking like move 1 foot in a 10-second period. Fast walkthroughs, zoomy cameras, not giving the cinematic feel. Nor can we see anything because we feel like we're gonna throw up, we're moving so fast. Another tip is to focus on the star of your image. So like if there is a chair in your image that you wanna focus on, make sure you linger there for a little bit longer. Lastly, you can use your camera movements to lead the eye. So like a gentle pan or a gentle tilt can kind of like reveal something slowly. L is for lighting, and this might be, aside from composition, the most important alphabet letter here in this video. So lighting, you've got your natural light, you've got your artificial light. Natural light is gonna be your sunlight, just like your environment. Artificial light is gonna be any lights that you add to your scene. You can have just a blank room model, and if it has good lighting, it's gonna be a good image. Lighting can bring warmth, realism, and most importantly, emotional impact to your design. There are so many different types of lighting. Let's just hit on a few. Ambient lighting. This is the overall glow of your image. These are gonna be your ceiling lights, your daylight, any like light that fills the scene, that's your ambient light. And that's what you should probably start with. So think about, do I want this image to feel light and bright and airy, or do I want it to feel dark and moody? And then go from there. Now your task lighting. This is focus light for specific activities. Think desk lights, kitchen lights, under cabinet lights, lights that light a specific task. I'd say this is probably what comes right after your ambient light, is figure out what other areas do I want to highlight. And then you've got your accent lighting. So this is going to be lighting something specific. So think about like a wall sconce like shining down on a piece of artwork. That's gonna be probably the last thing that you think about. And your lighting levels for those are probably not gonna be super high. Lighting and composition are pretty much everything. If you you do not take away anything else from this entire lesson, composition and lighting should be your two main focuses. M is for mindset. This is just a little plug because this is something that's gotten me messed up in the past, but you have to remember in your mind, becoming a good designer, becoming a good renderer, becoming a good anything is about progress, not perfection. Do not wait until your renderings are perfect to put them out into the world. Also, do not compare yourself to other people. I know that's really hard, but look at yourself yesterday. Don't look at someone else's rendering, compare yourself to them. Look at your renderings today compared to yesterday. Are they better? Are they worse? Let's make some adjustments. You also should be taking criticism well. I should be able to look at your image and tell you a couple things right off the bat, and instead of getting defensive about it, which I'm saying this because I have gotten defensive before when people critique my work, but looking back, if I hadn't had that critique, I wouldn't have improved. So welcome the criticism and just freaking keep it fun. Like, rendering is fun. Let's keep it that way. N is for nesting. This is just when you have multiple groups, multiple components within each other to kind of organize your file. Specifically, a 3D design program that I use is SketchUp, and I love nesting in there because when you double click inside the group or the component, and then you get into your next component, you just kind of keep double clicking. You can kind of just like edit that specific thing instead of worrying about the rest of the component or the group. Typically, nesting is used for more complex furniture or something that like has multiple different components to it. In simple terms, it's just an easy way to keep your model organized and manageable. O is for your output. This is the final result of all of your hard work. So it's your images, your animations, your videos, whatever it is that you're doing. Something I want to stress with output is your output settings. Now, kind of going back to our aspect ratio and composition conversation, we need to be very mindful of what our resolution is. The resolution is basically the pixels of your image. So like, how sharp is this thing gonna look on my computer screen, printed at, poster size on social media? Resolution is very important. And when you are exporting your images, make sure that you are actually exporting them and rendering them the way that you're supposed to in whatever program you're using. Do not just take screenshots of your images. It is going to completely ruin all of the hard work that you have done. Just go through the actual export process and you will get the high quality settings that you need. I personally like to organize all of my output in one folder, and I have like a specific naming style that is also in that PDF guide if you want to take a look there. P is for perspective versus parallel projection. Say that 3 times fast. Parallel projection is basically when you're looking at an orthographic view of your image, all of your vertical lines are vertical. It's basically like an axon. This can be good for certain types of presentation, mostly for like technical drawings. Perspective is going to give you that field of view where you're going to open up your camera angle a little bit and it's going to look more realistic. Like for instance, the vertical lines are going to start getting skewed a little bit because that's how it actually looks when you're in real life. Q is for quality settings, and this is going to go tie back into our output, aspect ratio, composition conversation. But the question is, what kind of quality settings are you using for your draft renders versus your final output? And I have an entire cheat sheet listed in the PDF guide, but just to hit on a few of them. For my draft settings, I'm usually working at a 1080p resolution, maybe even a little bit lower. For final, I'm doing more like 4K, sometimes 1080p. It just depends on what I'm using it for. Now for your draft images, you probably want to turn off your shadows, reflections, anything that's going to like slow down your rendering process. And then for finals, obviously we want the shadows, the reflections, the whole shebang on. In addition to that, the bloom would be the same kind of thing. Like maybe you don't want that on for draft, but you might want it on for your final. It honestly depends on what kind of program you're working in. R is for reflections. Reflections, oh reflections. Reflections come from shiny surfaces. That is not news. Think mirrors, glass, metal, glossy floors. They basically reflect light sources in your model, so reflections are extremely important in getting that realistic look. Like I said, sometimes I will literally just add a little bit of a reflection onto a material that doesn't necessarily need to be reflective because it just gives it a little bit of depth. If your renderings are looking flat, 3 spots that you can look for to add a little bit more depth are adding reflections to your glass, your mirrors, and your metals. I'm telling you, if your image is completely flat and you just take a look at those 3 things and add some reflection, your image is gonna look completely different. S is for software. Oh boy, we could talk about this for a while. Some interior design software just do certain things like 2D modeling or 3D modeling or rendering. There are so many interior design software out there. So like, how do you know which one to choose? Well, I'm pretty passionate about the ones that I have used and loved. And if you know me, you know that I never promote any sort of software that I, for one, can't use, and for 2, have used and don't like. So here's a quick breakdown of the software that I recommend. SketchUp is a 3D modeling tool that I use on all of my projects. It is great for building out your interiors, moving around ideas, conceptualizing. It is the software that I teach to my students in my classes. Layout is a companion to SketchUp, and that is where you can produce your construction documents documentation. Now, on the other hand, there's another software called Rayon that I only discovered within the last year or so, and that also does construction documentation. I think of Rayon as like Revit and AutoCAD like had a baby. It's like 2D modeling, web-based, but extremely parametric and like easy to move things and change things. And when you move and change things, it updates somewhere else. So that's another tool that I've been loving, but that is only 2D, which is a little bit of a bummer, but it does actually have a plugin with SketchUp, which I am learning more about. And I actually have another video coming out on that. While we're still talking 2D, Canva is another one that I use, especially for like mood boards, presentations, that kind of thing. And lastly, for rendering, my tried and true rendering software that I use, I teach, I just can't stop talking about is Enscape. It is my favorite. So user-friendly. It honestly gets you like 85% of the way there with your rendering. And Chaos, who owns Enscape, just keeps coming out with better and better tools. These are all the software that I teach in my courses. Again, those will be linked in the description below. T is for textures. I know we already talked about materials, but let's talk about textures a little bit more. We'll talk about PBR textures, which are physically based rendering textures. This is just a fancy way of saying the material looks and behaves like the real material in real life. But instead of just slapping a picture onto something, PBR textures use multiple different maps layered onto each other to create that realistic look. So let's talk about the texture maps that are built into a PBR material. Now, it depends on the software that you're using, but I'm just gonna talk about how they're shown in Enscape. With things like V-Ray, there's so many more options that you have, but let's just simplify this for this video. Map number 1 is gonna be your albedo map, color map, your diffuse map, your bit map. It's called so many different things in so many different software, but basically, if you were to take a picture of the like material that you wanna use, that's what the like diffuse map, the albedo map is. Next, we have our roughness map. This is gonna be basically a black and white version of your original map, and it's gonna tell the texture like how shiny different parts of the surface are. So like black is gonna tell it like, you know, this amount shiny, white is gonna tell it's this amount shiny. So that way it'll give it a little bit of variation. A normal or a bump map is going to look like this like crazy neon blue purple map. Again, it's gonna resemble your original texture, but it'll just be like a purple version of it. And this adds tiny little like bumps or again, like kind of imperfections without needing to actually like add bumps and textures to the geometry. And lastly, the metalness is just telling the render if the surface is metal or not. U is for upscaling, and this has gotten so much easier with AI. Basically, this is just taking, again, your resolution of your photo or your image or your rendering, basically adding pixels in so it looks crisper in a larger format. However, I always recommend just starting out rendering at a higher size. I'd say like honestly nowadays 4K is probably gonna be your minimum, but if you need to, you can always upscale with AI. Sometimes right within the render software, sometimes you have to go use like a website. I've never had super good luck with upscaling, so again, I just try to start with the highest render possible that I can without slowing down my workflow. V is for viewport. The viewport is basically how you're seeing your aspect ratio of your image. So there's something called a safe frame, or in different software, it's called different things. But basically what it'll do is the viewport that you're looking at on your screen, you can turn on to safe frame. So it will condense the image to the actual like size that you want to export it at, which is really helpful, especially like if you have this full viewport and then you're like, well, actually like my output is gonna be, you know, phone size. Okay, so then it's gonna change it like this. It's gonna show you exactly what you're gonna see when you export it at that phone screen size. So I always personally turn on my safe frame because I like to know what I'm gonna be looking at for my output. W is for white mode. White mode is also known as clay rendering, and it's basically just a render style where everything in your model is white or gray. And this kind of allows you to focus on the details of the geometry instead of getting too wrapped up in the lighting or the materials early on in the process. So you can either do full white mode, which is gonna strip away all the distractions, or you can do a combination and actually select some items in the scene and then tell it to make those color, but everything else white. Like for instance, I like to do that with glass. Like everything is white except for the glass because I still want to see those reflections, or even like vegetation, like add a little bit of life to the image. You have that ability in most of the software nowadays. X is for X-ray view. Now, X-ray view is just a modeling mode in which you can basically see through walls in your model. This just kind of helps you work in different parts of your model that maybe like aren't super accessible with all of the walls up. Most designers use this mode to align objects, check for any overlaps, or building details inside something like a cabinet or a wall or something like that. Y is for YouTube tutorials. YouTube can be such a good tool for learning any sort of visualization stuff online. Obviously, happy that you're here on my YouTube channel, but I also always recommend to people to check out the software's YouTube channel as well. Many of them offer demos that are obviously completely free. They're right here on YouTube. So I know like software like Enscape, SketchUp, Rayon, all those software that I mentioned earlier, a lot of them have free demo videos on YouTube. It's just kind of like a good starting point. The problem problem with YouTube is that like videos are just everywhere. And so unlike a course or something more structured, you're just gonna kind of grab pieces and parts, which is fine, but like it's really important to prioritize learning in a linear manner, especially if you are doing this professionally. Lastly, Z is for zoom. Zoom is pretty self-explanatory. It's just kind of like how far in or out you are away from an object in your model. Obviously, if you wanna focus on something, you might wanna be more zoomed into that item. Whereas if you're doing more of like an aerial image or something like that, you're gonna be way zoomed out. Now, we don't wanna confuse zoom with field of view. Zoom actually changes your distance from the object, whereas field of view, you stay the same distance, you just open up your camera angle more. If you use both of those tools together, you will get a realistic look. All right, that's it. Hopefully you found this video helpful and you're feeling inspired to go tackle this visualization thing on your own. And if not, as I said, I've got courses linked down below if you need some extra help. Again, I will link that PDF guide that goes along with this video in case you want those visuals for reference later. As always, if you found this video helpful, make sure that you like, comment, and subscribe so you don't miss any more of my videos. I would also love to hear like which one of these was like totally brand new information for you. So make sure that you drop that down in the comments. Class is dismissed.